Kick it off, or do we need to start there, or just wait for the feed up? Yeah, no worries. All good. Right. I think we're back on live stream. Welcome, councillors, and anybody else that's online, or councillors online, and whoever else is attending. Calvin, I'll hand it over to you for our long-term plan council workshop.
Thank you. This is the next in the series of workshops relating to long-term plan and the first public workshop. So really keen to start to ensure that the public has some transparency around the process, and it's quite timely as this workshop will be focusing on the early engagement, what we've learned from that, and then we'll draw back together the three circles of intent, experience, and expertise, and lived experience. So really, to kick this off, we'll have a quick recap of where we're at the process, and then we'll get into a fairly full agenda today around getting to a point where we have alignment on key priorities for this LTP. Just wait for that presentation to go. I'll run through where we're at because it's pretty straightforward. So really, we've got to remember that this LTP is our contract to the community. We are building a highly integrated story around where we're heading over the next 10 years. We need to focus on it being outwardly looking. And so that's bringing in aspects of the demographic we've got here, which is moving rapidly from a cultural, environmental, and economic point of view. Even over the 3 years since we've last been here reviewing it, it's moved dramatically. We need to make sure we're striking a balance upon what the community aspirations are, what our aspirations are, and ensuring that we're getting that sweet spot for what the community are looking for. But we also need to remember that we need to be grounded to where we are in this present time. Where we've been so far, we've gone through assumptions. With the early engagements underway, I'm going to report back on that in a moment. We've looked at the growth modelling where we've assumed a high growth trend to continue, albeit at a slightly lower level. You've reviewed the asset management policy, which is a key document to setting direction and tone of asset spend, and been updated around what's occurring around the environment with us, our external operating environment. And it is really, really uncertain what's going on at the moment. We are still sitting in a situation where we have a high cost of living. Inflation, while descending, is still sitting up high in the fives. We have legislative uncertainty with a changing government and a new government still to be formed, with their own aspirations around a 100-day plan, which will see potentially a lot of change in how we manage things. And of particular note is their stance on three waters or affordable waters. And while discussion has been around repealing that act, they are talking about other mechanism to capture funding within councils to ensure money is being put aside for future needs, which we don't know what that looks like or what it may come out, but we'll have to just wait and see, and that could also be an impact on this LTP. So we'll move forward into the voice of lived experience, and got Sarah here to run us through the findings from the research that's been undertaken recently.
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Goya Te Waka, he honona taku kia o Pāwaho, ko Otatahi Te Kāinga, ko Sarah Knutsis toku ingoa, he Communications Manager aho. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Right. So today I'm going to talk us through the voice of lived experience. Right, so I'm going to take us through the pre-engagement for the findings in relation to our long-term plan. The purpose of this research is to assist decision-making for aspects of the long-term plan and to ensure that we are connected to the communities in which we serve. Just need to work out how to drive it now. So in order to do that, I'll be taking us backwards to go forwards, so reminding the room of what our approach has been to this point, before considering the reach and results, then exploring findings and presenting future priorities along with community views on funding. So to recap on the pre-engagement research which was conducted, it was done so with 3 goals in mind. Firstly, to make use of information already available about the priorities of our residents and other stakeholders across the Selwyn district. We also wanted to include a qualitative component that explored in-depth views and priorities of those residents and stakeholders, as well as to use something that was a bit more innovative in terms of the suite of survey methods previously used to ensure that residents from across the district engaged in the research process for this long-term plan. Our first phase was secondary research, which was designed to help us understand why people chose to live or work in Selwyn, what challenges they face and how they want the district to grow in the future. The secondary research told us that 92% of residents believe Selwyn is a great place to live, and that a combination of exceptional facilities, a vibrant community and endearing culture contributed to this positive sentiment. We also learned that these sentiments were caveated by anticipated challenges specifically related to the growth of the region, but that we had obvious gaps in terms of the communities in which we hadn't heard from previously, which then helped us to design phase 2, where we held charrettes in Huiana with specific groups of diverse communities, including Māori, Pacifica, migrant, and also youth communities amongst them. Before we then went into phase 3, which finished earlier this month, which used a range of engagement methods, including gamifying engagement on Tennyson Street with a scavenger hunt, alongside traditional phone, intercept, and digital surveying methods. So the objective for pre-engagement was to address any gaps between what we thought we knew about our community and their thoughts, and to explore the principal practice gap to understand what the trade-offs would be. This graphic provides an overview of the activity and results from pre-engagement. We were aiming to reach the most amount of people within the selected audience, of which the targeting parameters were being Selwyn district specific. What this here shows us is that our ads were served over 2.6 million times to 373,000 people, seeing an ad on average over 7 times. Further engagement or click-through rate ranged and was on average around 2%. Paid channels received higher reach, and our own channels commanded higher engagement, so more click-throughs from our own channels. In total, we reached just under 800 people with the survey methods, which, to give you a comparison, is 2.5 times the numbers for pre-engagement for the last LTP. A bit on the demographics, which I'll continue on to the next slide. You'll see it on the right-hand side of the slide there. Our audience across both paid and owned channels was roughly 50-50 male-female split, with a slight skew to male in our owned social channels. 64% of our audience was in the 18 to 64 year range. This here further looks at the demographics of our research. Our demographic design aimed to capture diverse voices across the district, encompassing various ethnicities and spanning both rural and urban areas. A particular emphasis was placed on including farmers to ensure their views were represented. Of our sample, 7% of participants were from the rural farming community, with farming representation from the Melvin and Ellesmere wards being 11% and 15% respectively. Engaging a broad spectrum of ethnic backgrounds was also critical to this research. A quarter of the participants in this project identified with ethnicities other than New Zealand European or European. This distribution closely mirrors the ethnicity distribution for Selwyn from the 2018 New Zealand census, with a slight intentional overrepresentation of ethnic minorities. This slide here gives us a sense of the district split by ward and what their living demographics are. So moving through into current perceptions. There's a lot of information on this slide, so I'll just break it down. Looking at the left-hand side of the slide, understanding current resident sentiment and priorities is crucial for the development of an effective long-term plan. The majority of respondents felt positive about living in Selwyn, but ward-specific concerns highlight the need for tailored solutions in developing an approach to address the differing needs of the region. Before exploring residents' desires for the future, we first examined their perceptions of the current state so that we could understand what drew them to Selwyn originally, what they valued it most for, how connected to the district they felt, and where they had seen growth and development over the past 5 years. So as you can see here, 86% of residents have a positive experience living in Selwyn, which is consistent across the wards. Each ward has then been broken down into specific reasons for their neutral sentiment. So in Ellesmere, there is no specific concerns, but an overall feeling of an average experience. Melvin are concerned with services and infrastructure, and Rolleston residents have concerns around council, public transport and facilities, while Springs are concerned around rapid growth, roads and the town atmosphere changing. When we then look at the middle part of this slide, when reasons for choosing Selwyn were explored, many residents stated they were attracted to peaceful rural environment and also affordability. Over time, that closeness to family and job grow in significance and shows a shift in priorities, but it doesn't rank in the top 3 reasons for any specific ward. As residents embed themselves in the region, practical considerations such as closeness to family and jobs emerge more predominantly as what they value about living in the Selwyn district, especially in Rolleston, where it becomes number 1. This ongoing value on proximity to family and work is important as it ties in closely with residents' vision of a future Selwyn, which allows them to do it all in Selwyn throughout their lifespan. For the rest of the ward's residents continue to place the highest value on the peaceful rural environment. Then we go to the right-hand side of the slide. When compared to the 2023 research, there is a demonstrable change or difference. Previously, having good facilities and a strong sense of community were prominent reasons for choosing or living or choosing to remain here. However, in the 2023 research, good community facilities weren't given as much importance, and very few residents provided verbatims indicating community, neighbourhood or people as a reason. This aligns with findings showing a declining sense and connection to community within Selwyn, which is discussed further in the social wellbeing section. And then the bottom graph there, it is well known that Selwyn is one of the fastest growing regions in New Zealand. We explored with residents what areas they had seen the biggest growth in over the past 5 years. Infrastructure, economic and cultural growth were the most recognised areas. Many residents also selected other, and in their verbatim comments, in addition to the housing and residential development space, were urban sprawl. Residents also highlighted population growth, shopping and commercial development, sports and recreation, traffic and transport, diversity, environmental concerns, and a small number of respondents highlighted growing crime. What we then did with the research was we drew on drawing on the quality narratives that we had and backed by the quantitative data that we'd received, personas were crafted for the residents of Selwyn. These personas are representative archetypes, each telling a unique story, but collectively capturing the heart and soul of the Selwyn district. I will stress that the focus for creating these personas is to emphasise behavioural attributes which exist across ethnicities rather than tying a persona to a specific racial or ethnic background. They serve as tools to inform strategies to ensure that the diverse voices of Selwyn are heard and guide those decision-making processes. Each persona has a unique perspective, background, and set of values and concerns related to living here. So if I move from left to right, Fiona represents the long-established farming community in Selwyn. She values sustainable farming practices, protection of arable lands, and community green spaces. She brings the viewpoint of farmers who've witnessed the effects of urban encroachment and want to ensure that farming remains a vital part of our identity. John emphasises the importance of multi-generational living and wants to ensure that Selwyn remains a place where all age groups can thrive. He values sustainable development, aged care services, and retaining youth in the district. Catalina represents newcomers to the district and new cultural identities previously not represented in Selwyn. She emphasises the need for better public transport, community involvement, and economic development to make Selwyn attractive for new residents. Laura brings the perspective of those who move to Selwyn for its semi-rural charm and connection to nature. She represents those who want to maintain the balance of rural and urban life in the district. Laura values the sense of community, protection of the natural environment, and controlled development. And finally, Tom represents the younger generation. He stresses the importance of cultural representation and inclusion, affordable housing, and diverse social and entertainment opportunities. Moving on to the wellbeings. Our research was framed against the 4 wellbeing pillars, and we explored with our community what matters most of the 4 wellbeings. Tourette's and Huiana participants identified that it is difficult to separate the wellbeings as they are entwined. The general sentiment was that if you can take care of one, it will also contribute to the others, and that was a theme that came through, and you'll hear me talk about more. However, a prioritisation exercise within the Tourette's suggested that residents are most concerned with social and environmental wellbeing, with economic wellbeing following closely. This was supported by the quantitative findings, where overall environmental wellbeing was given the highest priority, with social wellbeing and economic wellbeing following closely. When you examine this ward by ward, Ellesmere and Rolleston stand out as they elevate economic wellbeing above others. Melbourne residents appear to be grappling with balancing social and environmental facets, while Springs strongly prioritises environmental concerns. Such ward-specific insights highlight the importance of tailored policy approaches, ensuring that the unique aspirations and concerns of each ward are adequately addressed in shaping Selwyn's future. So what does that mean? So digging a little bit further down, each wellbeing had particular recurring themes. And if we start with environmental wellbeing on the left-hand side, there were 3 key areas that came up most frequently. So the first of those was conservation and climate change, and in particular in this space, water and agriculture, with water recognised as being essential to life and should be protected. 97% of residents consider the protection of local water sources as of very high or high importance. They also expressed concern around the impact of farming on water and recognise the importance in ensuring advanced and sustainable farming techniques. Secondly, access to green spaces, which was described as not just being more parks and sports grounds, but recreation, community spaces, and also food development. 94% of residents prioritise the inclusion of green spaces in development, with 61% ranking it of very high importance. Finally, for environmental wellbeing, residents stress the importance of balancing diversity with land development to protect Selwyn's unique culture and lifestyle by using land in the right way. And within this space, there was talk of vertical expansion rather than horizontal sprawl, which is something that comes up again in an upcoming slide as well. Within the social wellbeing space there, it was highly ranked both within a quantitative and particularly within a qualitative view. From a qualitative perspective, residents often stated that what is best for people is best for the district. There are 4 key themes in this area of wellbeing. 67% of people prioritise access to healthcare as of very high importance to future wellbeing. While acknowledged that this is a national issue, residents stress the need to prioritise this as they already face issues accessing healthcare regardless of population growth, and they highlighted mental health, especially along with aged care. 46% of residents prioritise access to education as being of very high importance to their future wellbeing. This prioritisation was most pronounced amongst those aged 25 to 65, likely because this demographic typically includes parents of children and young adults. It underscores the aspiration of residents to build a district where their children would want to stay and thrive as they grow older. Thirdly, residents feel that Selwyn's infrastructure development is primarily centred on Rolleston and doesn't cater to the youth or ageing population, emphasising the need for proactive planning that addresses the district's growing and future needs. They stressed the need for forward-thinking planning that was proactive to support the population growth. Finally, for social wellbeing was sense of community, which came through strongly in both the secondary research and all other forms of data collection. The importance of a Selwyn sense of community. However, in contrast, many residents expressed an increasing disconnect. 66% of residents feel connected to the Selwyn district, which is a decline from 73% in the 2021 resident survey. Rolleston, 7.8% feel disconnected, and in Melbourne, 8.8% feel not connected at all, which presents opportunities for intentional inclusion of events, activities, and spaces that support community connection. On to economic wellbeing. Youth and the ageing population perceive lack of public transport as significantly limiting access to development, employment, and recreation opportunities, and in many cases also restricting access to essential services such as healthcare and social connections. Safe cycleways was also highlighted as impacting those without cars not being able to cycle safely, then leaving them with limited sustainable or environmentally friendly transport options. This was an area that was significant for residents, and they indicated it was an important part of all four of the wellbeings. However, they also stressed the importance that any additional public transport that is introduced needs to be thoughtfully planned out to allow for ease of use with regards to where stops are placed, and also with thought for the future development and spread of the district. Urban spread. The majority of participants were supportive of regulating developments to ensure diverse housing options. Access to affordable housing was ranked as the fourth most important area for residents' future wellbeing. Urban spread and building up and how this vertical expansion may assist with housing affordability was also discussed. And then finally, within the economic wellbeing, digital connectivity was also discussed. Limited digital connectivity was seen to limit economic growth and wellbeing for some residents, especially post-pandemic with changes to business. Due to district limited connectivity, some residents felt they can't capitalise on entrepreneurships or remote working opportunities. Then finally, within the cultural wellbeing pillar, many residents felt cultural wellbeing was one of the lesser focuses, echoing that if people were looked after, cultural wellbeing would also be looked after. Residents, especially for younger and more diverse groups, believe the council should proactively champion and protect cultural diversity in the district, starting with meaningful engagement with mana whenua and prioritising their representation. The establishment of a memorandum of understanding is seen as a crucial step towards this goal. They advocated also for the creation of cultural spaces, promotion of cultural arts, and safe environments that celebrate all identities. So looking to the future, delivering a sustainable Selwyn. When asked about their priorities for the next 10 years, residents overwhelmingly highlighted the importance of a sustainable Selwyn, which you will have heard me mention through a lot of the research. There was talk of forward planning and looking to the future. While many recognise and even welcome the inevitable changes brought by population growth and the benefits of increasing diversity, there's a strong desire to preserve what they love about the area. Residents welcome the impending population growth and diversity, but prioritise retaining the core values and charm of the region. Key aspects of this sustainable vision include self-sufficiency, enabling residents to live, work and play within Selwyn, infrastructure and amenities, emphasising services, healthcare and community spaces, and environmental and developmental sustainability, managing land use, housing and green spaces effectively. Notably, economically innovative Selwyn ranks here as the second priority, which reflects its significance in realising a vision of a sustainable Selwyn. During the Tourette's and Huiana, there was consensus that for Selwyn to evolve into a holistic hub where individuals can seamlessly work, live and play across various life stages, a robust and dynamic economy is imperative. Such an economy would provide ample work and career progression opportunities and bolster the broader community wellbeing. This recognition and emphasised a focus on championing economic innovation and entrepreneurship, and the collective call for nurturing local businesses as a cornerstone of Selwyn's future. The overwhelming sentiment is for Selwyn to evolve as a comprehensive one-stop shop, minimising dependency on external regions. So what were people willing to trade? So as we evolve, certain changes become inevitable. So to gauge receptivity to these changes, willingness to accept various options were explored. Major resistance was observed against reducing green spaces at 85%, losing local businesses, 93%, and compromising the town's ambience at 57%. However, nuanced discussions revealed flexibility, and discussions in Tourette and Huiana revealed more negotiable areas than initially indicated. Many were willing to consider things when different perspectives and also clear reasoning were presented to them. For instance, while many people opposed reducing available farmland, this stance softened when ensuring protection for productive farmland, leaving less fertile areas for development. Similarly, residents were more amenable to higher public transport costs if the service was dependable and reduced car dependency. It's also important to note that feedback regarding connection to Christchurch City from the qualitative research was not as opposing. Many residents mentioned that while they don't mind travelling to Christchurch if they want to, the predominant preference is for a sustainable Selwyn to become a one-stop shop. So this is a vision of a self-sufficient and sustainable Selwyn, which resonates across residents groups and was considered an area of priority for the long-term plan. So looking at and to fully understand how to bridge the principal practice gap, residents were asked, what would be your preferred options for funding initiatives to drive Selwyn towards its desired future? Residents within the Tourette setting expressed a belief and an openness to alternative strategies outside of traditional funding approaches. Various models were proposed. 65% favoured developers being mandated to include facilities in their projects. Other popular options included 73% user pays funding and a slight increase in rates. Within the 7% something else category were suggestions of partnership and funding from the central government. The majority, however, were around using existing taxation and rates to fund residents' desired sustainable Selwyn. Participants acknowledged that growth could lead to a need for higher rates. The overarching sentiment is that residents are willing to accept necessary funding decisions to see their desired future come to fruition. However, they want to see transparency, effective communication, and clarity on the why.
We'll
And that is me.
So thanks, Sarah. We'll take a section break on this and have a discussion around observations from you on what has come back from our community. It's the community view, and sometimes it can be surprising what pops out of these, where we have a quite invested interest when you're internal in an organisation, that you miss some of these nuances which come from the public. So the next section from here, just to excited about what's next, is the views of yourselves from the surveys that you completed, and a little bit of a comparison with where the community lay. But we'll just open it up for general comments or areas where they'd like staff to have a bit more of a dive into or clarifications.
Sam? Oh, sorry, Elizabeth Munn.
Oh, it's me. It's a bit difficult because I tried to write a lot, but one of your slides you had other. I don't know if we can pop them back up and go to one of the last ones that had a bunch of graphics with other. I'd just be quite interested to know what kind of comments you got when you did give people the chance to put comments in? Was it a overriding theme coming through on some of the other where people got to put the additional comments?
The verbatim comments were different depending on what section it was. So I'll need to go back through and find,
Maybe
This
the,
is future priority over the next 10 years, I think. So
yeah, let's look at that one.
Slide 22.
Slide 22.
I'm just wondering, it's an opportunity to sort of summarise thoughts, and maybe at the risk of diving too far, but you found it now.
Yeah, there we go.
yeah. So I don't have that specific information to hand, so I'll need to go away and come back to you on that one.
Thank you, Councillor Mudd. Sam?
Yeah, well, thank you for the work that's gone into providing this feedback. And actually, listening to that filled me with a whole lot of hope about what our community wants to see and the things that they expect our council to deliver. I think there's a wee bit of a, this is around comms and expectation about the things that people want to have, and then our responsibility to deliver them or partner with others to have them delivered, or see the advocacy around central government delivering them, which is obviously something that we have had ongoing as a conversation for a while, but nothing specific in there. But as you were going, maybe it was just your great presentation style, but it was really helping me feel like, cool, there's people that are excited about our future in the same way that we are excited and want to be here to be able to deliver stuff for our future. So there's a whole lot of things. I'll be interested to see what the next couple of slides say about what councillors want, including my feedback. But that sounds like the sort of future that I want to be part of delivering for our community. So great.
Kia ora, Sam. Thank you. Sophie?
Yeah, I was just going to say there's not a huge amount that you can disagree with in principle in there, is there? One question was, so a lot of these slides we don't have in our packs. Is there a chance that we can get that? Thank you. And I had a couple of questions. So for instance, one of the slides that mentioned around better digital connectivity. Is there a way of finding it? Like, I'm wondering whether that's people who have moved to a lifestyle block and then realise that there isn't a cable that runs past their driveway, or like is there a way of drilling down to, or is that just too much detail? Because I mean, the digital connectivity part isn't really something that we can necessarily do much more than advocate for.
Yeah. What I can do is go back to the research company and ask them to break it down by ward. I'm not sure that we'd be able to get much more clarity from beyond that, but I can pull more of the raw data if that's useful.
I think what you'll find across the entire district, there'll be pockets of poor digital coverage. And you're right, there's nothing we can do about it, but we can look at, when we're running pipelines and other things, looking at the opportunities of ensuring chorus are engaged to make improvements along at the same time. And, there's nothing worse than seeing something ripped up multiple times to put services in.
Yeah.
Sam made a really good point around, and I think referring to transport, digital connectivity, the real thought that we need to think about is how do we go about lobbying, partnering, and creating the innovative thought around doing things differently. People do get stuck in the status quo of, we have the opportunity to influence on especially with Sam's position now, around what are some of the innovative solutions that we can come up with that we may not deliver, but we can influence heavily.
Yeah. I was going to ask as well, just it's not necessary right now, obviously, but if there's any insight around the people who are sort of talking about being close to family and jobs, particularly jobs, like that's a bit of a shifting definition. Is close, like that could mean that it's half an hour down the road, or it could mean that it's their idea of what an acceptable distance and journey is. So I don't know if we've got, and I don't know whether that's even worth focusing on at all. It just felt like a non-specific.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that within that space, there was a lot of feedback regarding public transport as well. So the definition of what that closeness means, I mean, if there were changes made to public transport, that may change quite dramatically as well. But the overarching essence was that people do want a sustainable future where they can live, work, play, and complete life's journey as well. So that kind of talks to a lot of the different facets, retaining youth in the district, all of those kind of themes that were coming through.
Thank you. Grant?
you used a really nice word, the essence, I think was the word. And having been here for a few of these, is a very, and Malcolm and Deborah's not here, but there's a strong theme coming through. There's a lot of aspiration and desire, and it all sounds really good. But when you put the chart up saying, how would you like to pay? Inevitably, it's someone else. No one's saying put my rates up. And that's the challenge, really, that of this whole exercise really is what is the sweet spot of what you're prepared to pay versus the service you provide. And I guess if you wanted some immediate feedback, my community, the ones that talk to me, are saying that they are struggling to manage what they've got in their plate now without us loading a whole lot more on. So whether that's different in your communities, I probably represent a reasonably affluent community, I would say, in my Springs ward, but there are real challenges around affordability. And I suppose it's that, we see our neighbour who has gone down the path that we're heading a number of years ago and got into spending large and borrowing large and got themselves in a pretty difficult position. And I just want us to take note of perhaps other people's examples. And who is the exemplar we're following here? Have we got an exemplar council? We go, gee, we'd love to be like them. Is it Singapore? Is it Wellington? Is it where's the exemplar that we're sort of modelling ourselves on?
Sarah, you just don't slide.
What slide was that, sorry?
Number 3.
See microphone go.
Grant, you missed the workshop of last week or the week before. So slide 3 of the entire pack. Yeah. Next one. Yeah. So what we're trying to get at today is the blue bubble there, or circle, is the lived experience, which we're just talking about here, and we'll chip in here a little bit with councillors' views. Intent, which is legislatively driven, council aspirations, mana whenua aspirations, and other strategies, and then the expertise, which is us good people coming in with our views, and what we're aiming for is trying to hit that, as you said, the sweet spot. So rather than chasing something that might be sitting out on one of the circles on its own with no overlap, the other things that have least priority. So funding questions come in, we deprioritise some of those, and we prioritise what sits in the middle that benefits the most.
Thank you. Sharon?
Bob was before me.
Bob was, yes, Bob.
I was just going to say it's going to lead to some challenging conversations, I think, around prioritising, and and Kelvin has covered that off. There will be some challenging prioritisations for councillors to consider, and we know that won't be easy.
Thank you, Sharon. Bob?
Yeah, I think in rural Melbourne, a lot of the people have got a lot of apathy about what's happened, because they say, well, we've lived here for 30 years, the road's still the same outside, and there's nothing much. The roads are worse than they used to be. So there seems to be a lot of apathy, and people are losing interest in getting into the council because they don't believe anything will be done. And I think that's really important thing, that we really talk to the people and make sure they've got confidence in council that they will bother to talk to us, because just about most of the people that I talk to, especially in the rural areas, feel that they're not getting good value and not listened to. So I think that's one of the main things we need to listen to.
Kia ora, Bob. Does anybody have any more questions?
Well, it's a commentary really on the discussion that we're having, because it's great, and it's focused on the circles really, that there's some expertise or lived experience in the room, using the language that's there. There's some intent that we're sharing that's based on the lived experience of people that we associate with and who talk to us and who we hear from and bump into and who are regular and familiar to us. And that is going to bump into the lived experience through the research that we're hearing, which is a broader, wider, beyond what any one of us individually might see and feel in this. So it's really good to have this conversation, which brings some challenges to me and the people that will talk to me. This brings in all the other bits about the people that won't have those conversations or those opportunities, and the same for Bob and the same for Nicole. And I think the 3 circles is a really good way to think about how we have this conversation around priority, because otherwise we're only bringing our own experience into it, and then we end up clashing with one another around, well, this is what I've heard, well, this is what I've heard. But actually, the research today shows some community aspiration that doesn't necessarily fit with any one of us and the views that we would have otherwise have brought to here. So yeah, keen to see what the next piece is and how closely aligned or divergent we were on where it needs to be.
Yeah, very good, Sam. I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. And that's, I guess, why it's so important, or the importance of having a live stream workshop, so that potentially those that are listening in can hear some of the diverse conversations that are going on, and shares a bit of the experiences around the table. I really appreciate the work that's gone into face-to-face engagement with your the Huyana and the charrettes with the various different groups. And as Sam said, particularly groups that we may, as councillors, may not have the opportunity to meet every day. Good to see such positive feedback as well at 92%. Great to see the employers are on the list, and potentially, if they're through the conversations here today, as Bob's pointed out, important to include some of those elder residents and senior residents that have, and potentially have anyway. So I'm not telling you it's like gigs or anything like that. I noticed on one of the slides here, you've got an 18 to 44-year-old walking with a walking stick. I was going to say, gee, because he's had a hard life, the old 44-year-old. And
it's accessibility we're covering off.
oh, sure. Apologies.
That was the Easter egg.
Thank you. Thank you for clarity.
Good spotting.
But also the I guess the data is very good because it serves as dual use when we're thinking about, and perhaps Councillor Dean is on their chair of representation review, further data to be used in the communities of interest as we move forward. So again, I just appreciate the work that's going into it. It'll be great to see where the sweet spot is eventually when we make the decisions around the rubber hitting the road. So onwards to the next slide.
I don't know if I should draw your attention, but I think there are a couple of councillors online wanting to talk.
Go ahead there, whoever it is.
I think there's two.
I'll start off because I'm here. Phil is first. He has been flashing red lights and everything else, and I just want to bring it to your attention that he needs to say something urgently.
No, not urgently, but thank you, Deborah. I appreciate that. I was actually, it was about the representation.
You're on the clock here, guys, and scope. Question, please.
Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
My question is, what was your feedback in terms of how the community identified with themselves? I'm interested in the urban, rural, and also the Christchurch versus non-Christchurch views.
So we didn't look into the research with regards to, do you mean people living in Christchurch versus non-Christchurch resident, or
No, I mean,
versus non?
like, for example, the people in parts of Selwyn that are closer to Christchurch identify as being part of Selwyn, or identify as being part of Christchurch?
I think that falls into the same category in terms of being able to break it down by ward, but not necessarily further than that. So what we could do in future is look at profiling those areas more, but that wasn't something that was considered for this piece of research.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Are there any more questions?
Yeah.
Councillor Hassan.
Yes, thank you. Just following on from Phil's question, we have the Greater Christchurch Urban Development Strategy, or area, and then we have outside that, and I'd like to understand, because there is, while it's decreasing, there is still a rural community within that locality, and just wanting to understand how they see their future with the pressure of trying to farm with regards to those that want urban growth. I know we don't want urban sprawl, but the issue is around reverse sensitivity of trying to farm next door to an urban area.
Thanks, Deborah. That's interesting stuff that I think we can capture a little bit through some other research that we'll do coming up, especially around next stages of representation, but also with the LTP itself. It's quite specific, and what we were trying to do is to achieve that general overview. but clear research within it showed the concern around sprawl, as you said, and thinking about how we deal with that, but also making sure that we're using good soils in good ways as opposed to putting concrete over them and building. So I think we get that piece. It is that challenge though. What are that smaller group of people who are now neighbours to urban who weren't previously, how they're feeling about things.
Thank you for understanding that. And just around sort of like, are we looking at buffer zones? Because that is a hard core of how a lot of people in that rural environment are actually feeling about how do they continue to farm in the future when they have urban on their doorstep. And it's not just with regards to farming, it is trespassing, it is people not understanding land ownership and wanting to actually, you know, partake, shall I say, urban traction, whatever, through people's land tracts. And I'm just trying to highlight that because this is starting to be a real issue about trespassing and not understanding land ownership with regards to people just thinking there's an open space, oh, I can just walk through it.
Thank you very much, Deborah. I appreciate your points taken on board.
It will certainly feature as part of the work that goes on around future cell and spatial plans and thinking about how we deal with the future with the likes of buffer zones and things like that.
Thank you. Moving on to the next slides. Good, Jenny.
Excuse me, I'm going to flick through quite quickly. Thank you. Okay. Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much.
So the first one here we're looking at is what was important to you over the next 10 years for Selwyn, and we'll come to some comparisons shortly, but clear leader here was the economic innovator, and remembering back to, I think, one of the slides just before, that was second from the community where sustainable was top. Not too much of a difference, 10%, but sort of similar in alignment of where things are heading. Elected member engagement results, and so important to prioritise within the LTP here. Two stood out with high importance and very high importance being the economic opportunities and infrastructure and connectivity. And if you look down the bottom of this slide here, the pieces in bolder print are the key priorities there, and mass rapid transit, a roading network and how safe and accessible and well maintained it is, water, community facilities and spaces were your focus, and the smaller sitting below that were your secondary preferences, which again are all things we've heard discussed before. Just moving through. So this is looking at what would be open to accepting in the future, and what's highlighted at the bottom is the stuff that you're not keen on, and that fully aligns with what the community said. So reduction in green spaces is a no, and likewise loss of local business also a no. But at the other end of this, there's again some alignment with the increased noise, which was sort of a bit of a no on a community basis, but a view that needs to come, but higher public transportation costs. And while not unpacking the comments on this, I'd expect that that's the same criteria as the community, willing to pay more if it's more frequent, more reliable, and greater opportunities. And then a series through the middle, which were reasonably similar. Moving here forward, we've got the alternate funding streams. And it'll be interesting just to unpack this a little bit more on pieces, but there was complete alignment around developers being required to include facilities and developments and probably paying a greater share. And we've heard that sentiment a number of times. Where there was no increase in rates, there is a 30% increase in rates. And the second highest here was a public-private partnership. So it'd be interesting just to unpack that a little bit more and a higher view on user pays funding than what the community had said. Some areas where it would be most supportive of additional funding to go towards was by far transport infrastructure as being the highest, public transport, and then a series of others that were of lesser importance. Yes. Good question. I'm Sarah, the question around pay it forward in the survey, what was that shaped around?
Yeah, it was shaped around of somebody else paying for something and then that coming back to you, if that kind of makes sense. So to use, I guess, an example, if you pay for somebody's groceries in the supermarket, then for the person behind you, then that may pay it forward for somebody else. Well, not necessarily the mortgage, but it may be if you're standing in line for the aquatic centre, you know, treating somebody else who's wanting to spend some time there. I'll go back and get more information with respect to how that might work in terms of infrastructure and some of the more.
Thank you.
30% thought it was a good idea. Next, Jen. So now we'll look into some of these comparisons. So where there was some diversion, so we had elected members with economic innovation at 40%, where the community was at 30%. While some diversion, not hugely different, but when you flick it around the other way, with the sustainability, quite a difference there at 17%. Some alignment through the middle around connectedness, but then differences around community-led, and there was no other recognised from this group. So obviously knowing what goes on means you're a little bit more focused on the things you choose. On here around funding sources, the big division here was around public-private partnerships. Quite a significant difference, so it's one that we probably should think about and unpack that a little bit more. Otherwise, there was reasonable alignment across there, with the exception of the slight increase in rates, but it was not a question that we asked, given we know what the answer really is on that. Then looking at the trade-offs, real alignment across here, and especially around increased traffic. That's something, if we were to grow, that we have to deal with, but complete alignment around loss of local business and reduction in green space, and then some others which are slight differences, but more the arable farming thing coming up was really important to the council. We discussed that a lot because of the views of the wards coming through. And I think the change to small town feel was picked up in the sentiment from the community. It was probably just in a slightly different way it was sold. So that draws the community, the councillor views of the world. Might just pause and take any comments on those, thoughts on where we had a big division between our view, well, the councillors' views and the community views.
Councillors? Yeah.
I mean, there were round numbers for the councillor feedback, which probably suggests there was 10 of us that responded, and each 10% was one person. And so if there was 40 or 50 it's like just one of us picking a particular way. So it's actually hard, I think, to read too much into the councillor piece there when the difference is maybe only 10 or 20%, because it just talks about two of us around the table, and Megan may not have filled it in, and one of us didn't as well. So there was, I guess, the unpacking for me is around what did people understand public-private partnership to be, because it seemed really well supported, and I'm not sure what that actually really means, and wasn't in it. When I was filling it out thinking, I don't have too many good stories to tell about how that has eventuated, but keen to explore what that looks like. And there's obviously a lot of people that feel like that could be a really good way to go. So keen for that to be unpacked. If those that really want to see that happen could share with the group what that looks like in their eyes.
Sure, Sam. Thank you, Sophie.
Yeah, I guess for me, some of it almost, I mean, as Sam says, like we're a sample size of 10 as opposed to, and that, you know, it's not huge. But in some ways, some of the differences kind of give you a steer on how to nuance some of the, like, if there's more economic development, well, that's a steer on, don't necessarily go all out for crazy startup businesses that aren't necessarily going to, like, if it looks like it's environmentally sustainable or could be beneficial in that way, then that seems to be a bit more of a steer community wise. And same with the infrastructure developments, like it changes maybe where, yeah, within a broad range of things where you end up putting the money. And yeah, of course, we're going to be thinking a bit about the money, because we realise that you can't have nice things without paying for them, unfortunately. But yeah.
Kia ora, Sophie. Thank you. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I found that really interesting. I really appreciated how you put it all together. I think it was really a nice, easy read, and it was great to have that comprehensive done in that way. I loved seeing that there was that volunteering element, because I actually think if we're looking at reducing our rates, and we've also been talking about localism through LG&Z, what does localism look like? You know, we have to go a bit back to the old ways in which community halls were run by the local people to keep the costs down to count for councils. And, you know, is that what the volunteering means? I don't know if somebody would like to explain to me what when that went in there, what does the volunteering mean to us when we put that up there and ask people about it? Yeah, just really also like the paying it forward. I'd love to hear more on that concept, because, you know, I think it's great to explore these new avenues potentially. And I think also talking about sustainable, I think that's such a broad concept that it can mean different things to different people. For me, it means a circular economy. And one of the things that I think I'd love to see addressed, and I know Lincoln Envirotown's really big on it, is plastic packaging and the waste streams that we create, and creating, you know, should we not be one of the first towns to navigate that, you know, those facilities and those opportunities?
Thanks, Elizabeth. You want to answer that, or would you like to hear from Megan first?
Oh, you're right. Sustainable is a broad term, and to create a sustainable organisation as an organisation that'll be here in 50, 100, 200 years' time. So what do you need to be to continue to operate, and looking after the environment, looking after your people, looking after the cultural well-being? All of those things come into sustainable, as opposed to taking a very narrow lens, which is sustainability or environmental sustainability. It's balancing all of it together, and that's what the well-beings, I believe, do so well. That's an understanding of sustainability. But yes, thinking about how we can encourage that circular economy in the right way. We can influence, but we can't drive. Yeah.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, kia ora. Rather than speak to the presentation, I thought I would respond to your question, Sam, which is about what do councillors think and feel about public-private partnerships, or what's their understanding? And if I go back to the late 2000s, about 2008 to 2010, the government were putting this in front of us as potential options that most New Zealanders were opposed to. But the model that was proposed in that, or the examples that were proposed at that time, were like the private roading. And you might get the contract to build a road and then you get to lease it for 50 years or something like that. But bring forward to now, and what I see public-private partnership as is actually just co-investment. And it might be identifying, well, which groups do you want to co-invest with and how does co-investment look? Because it might be one party putting up most of the money and somebody else delivering the service. And so a modern day example of excellent co-investment from my perspective is Tāwhaki. So Tāwhaki being the Kaiteriti Spit Aerospace Centre, where this week there's been the runway being laid as of yesterday. So with that, it is owned by 3 entities in shares, each contributing different value, each contributing a dollar value for the initial funding, and then thinking about how those services or who will build the social license and who will do what aspects. So when we're talking about the co-investment strategy in a couple of papers ago, that are the kinds of things that I would expect to see there. I don't see it more as I don't see it as public-private partnership in the old sense, the PPP. I see it as a co-investment model.
Thank you, Megan. Grant?
I was thinking about this quite a bit. And probably when I started on the council, and it's not be one of those old in my day stories, but it is a wee bit. Malcolm will probably, it was very clear what our role was, Malcolm, wasn't it? We did sewage, we did rubbish and roads. But now I sort of feel we're getting bombarded with a whole lot of level of service requests or expansion of our level of service, which I'm not sure we've actually agreed to or actually sat down and had a deliberate conversation about what we do. And in fact, do we have the social license to do what we think we do? Which is perhaps what you're telling us through some of your researches. And but like you, Elizabeth, I was, the sustainable catch-all. If you ask anyone you want to be sustainable, you won't get many people saying no. Everyone wants to be sustainable. What is sustainable, and what's the council's role in sustainable? And what part do we have to play in it? And it worries me, I guess, that our level of service creep is incremental, but the costs are getting included into our budget and becoming non-refundable. You just don't get them out of the cost structure. So I think if we're going to get into some of these things, which through this LTP, and I think it's been very good how you've defined what our population wants. Do we have a social license to do it? Is everyone behind it before we start committing to this sort of expenditure? Because I'm not sure I'm 100% convinced that we've got the social license, particularly where you have overlap. A good example today is we had quite a conversation about Indigenous biodiversity. More logically, you would think that might be Environment Canterbury's role to be right in the biodiversity space, and us perhaps a little bit supportive, but we seem to be boots and all. And then we start thinking about some of our health and other services that we want to provide, which in an ideal world would be provided by the Ministry of Health and Education and Social Welfare and those sort of services. So I think in some respects we're stepping up because we're seeing gaps not being provided by providers which should be doing it, and we're having to fill those spaces, which maybe it's Sam's role and our role to actually shape the organisations that should be providing those services.
Thank you very much, Grant. Councillor Hassan? And you're talking. If you're trying to talk, I can't see you. Deborah, you there?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I'm listening.
I've just got a note here that you wanted to ask a question. No? Great. Yes, thanks very much for the feedback. It's great to see councillors thinking, and also another benefit of having public streaming on these points, because it does shed a little light for those that perhaps potentially might be listening. Kelvin?
Just comment on the public-private or the co-investment. I think the key thing to that is investment, and to thinking it might work for building our roads or waste pipelines. The other party does have to have a return out of it. That becomes the challenge with public-private in that sense, but fully support and promote us in our investment thinking to be co-investing. And that's where our expertise, which is probably sits largely with a balance sheet, but having the expertise of other organisations to actually deliver this, you get good outcomes.
Kia ora. Thanks, Calvin. Certainly shows the benefit of having a partnership around the table. Kia ora. Next part of the.
Shane, can I ask
Yes.
a question on that? Is it, with the analysis that's been done, is it as easy as pushing a button that I could see my own results against the community's results? And not in a public way. I'm not thinking we share everyone's individual results, but I'd be quite interested in my own feedback and how that's sat alongside the community's feedback. If that's a lot of work, I'm not asking for a lot of work. If it's a push button, I'd appreciate that feedback.
We can definitely look into that. I don't know if we can identify individuals through the raw data.
We-
We can go away and see if that's.
We have got the raw data for councillors,
Yeah.
so therefore we can match that against the overall results in here.
I just may not want it, and
Yeah.
but I would appreciate it.
Can you not complete yourself?
Thank you.
Right. The next section of this, we're going to look at the voice of expertise, and I like the way you describe us as expertise. So next slide. Oh, sorry. Before we get to that, community outcomes. So we have refined the community outcomes through this process, and only very subtle changes, but below you've got what sits below the aspirations. I'll just read the aspiration piece out around each of them. So environmental, so Selwyn's landscape, natural landscape, water, biodiversity are protected and enhanced. Our towns are cleaner and greener, and we address climate change. So there's been a bit of a tweak from where we were previously. These will get sent out so you can look at them. And then the three key pillars sitting underneath that are a clean environment, livable, low carbon towns, and productive, diverse land. Moving across to social, Selwyn is a resilient district and a great place to live, work and play, where residents support each other, enjoy spending time together and feel a sense of belonging, with the three pillars being connected community, strong neighbourhoods and active and educated community. And there's a series of outcomes that sit below that, which we'll get into at a later workshop. Economic, Selwyn is a prosperous economy that employs and empowers our people to invest in our towns. We support our sustainable and productive rural sector to feed New Zealand and the world. And we've got two pillars here, which is a district of opportunity and quality innovative infrastructure. And finally, the cultural side. We have Selwyn as a collection of connected and diverse communities. We have strong partnerships, which allows our people to thrive, and everyone has a place to call home, with the two pillars being a district which values its culture and heritage and inclusive communities. We'll come back in another workshop with more detail, which sits below, and those outcomes will be connected to the deliverables, which will be proposed through the LTP.
Thank you, Calvin. I'm presuming under the cultural, there's arts in there as well.
So we get to the. So under a district which values its culture and heritage, a district celebrates its arts and culture. We carry our traditions with us, and local history and heritage is preserved, shared and promoted. Under inclusive communities, partnerships with mana whenua and tangata whenua, and we promote each town's unique identities and our rural identity.
Thank you.
Okay, moving forward to the voice of expertise. How we will manage this piece is ultimately we'll get this into the, which is the next part of the workshop, into each of the four wellbeings, but we'll address this as each exec member on our views, and you'll see through this there is some crossover in common, and that it just reflects how the organisation is set up, and that as an executive we see this as a broader thing moving forward. So you'll see that when we come through, but we might just kick off with, why don't I kick off and then I can have a rest. So in the enabling services space, 3 key priorities coming through for us, and that's which we've talked about a little bit already, is digital Selwyn. And this is, we have faced an historic underinvestment in our tools and systems, and therefore we do have a deficit in technology. And earlier today in the public forum, talking about websites and how we engage and various things like that, that's sort of the visible piece that sits outward. There's a whole lot of systems and tools internally which have been brought together at various times for various reasons, and all good reasons, but there's a lack of cohesiveness about them. So we do need to make some investment into that digital technology, which leads to efficiency and effectiveness, improved services, and that connection with the community. The second is around efficiency and effectiveness. And the way I sort of sum this up, we've had rapid population growth for the past decade, and we've probably been rapidly doggy paddling to stay ahead above water as to deliver services, and therefore haven't been able to put the attention into developing the way we do things to get more efficient and effective outcomes. And we've got to a point as an organisation where it's time to rethink how we do things and move some of those processes into the future, and to make sure that we're ready for the demands of the future, rather than adding people to the problem. That's adding tools, processes. And the third one is around alternate funding and cost management. So similar trend here, the growth has occurred. We've benefited from that growth and the collection of development contributions, which go to funding the build of new facilities, but they don't go to the funding of the operation of new facilities. So while we've delivered a whole lot of investment in that regards, we are now feeling the pressures of increased costs, broader range of assets and facilities to manage, which is meaning that we need to think about how we maintain rates at manageable levels by increasing alternate funding mechanisms, whether that's how we manage fees and charges, how we look to recover certain costs, and importantly, how we invest and get returns from non-traditional council sources. And another one there is really how we leverage the government or central government. We do it well in some spaces in terms of alternate funding, but we're probably not consistent about that and actually thinking far enough ahead of how do we maximise that return from that community good funding. I'll hand it across to Denise.
Just following on in terms of some of the challenges, and this picks up on Councillor McInnes's earlier point. One of the challenges is about meeting service demand growth. In the face of the ongoing population growth and the associated increase in service program popularity and demand, the challenges to meet the pace and growing level of demand with increased and innovative service and program delivery now as well as into the future. Along the similar lines, it's responding to the increasingly diverse service needs and demands. In the face of a community that is becoming increasingly diverse, the challenges to deliver and or to take up Councillor Miller's comment and or facilitate the delivery of a diverse range of accessible, innovative services and programs to meet demand and customer service expectations. Connected strongly to what Kelvin had talked about, we need to consider the different approaches to reduce and or manage cost increases and close the cost gap. In the face of significantly increasing operational cost pressures, internal and external, the challenge is to consider closure and divestment of underperforming facilities, 2, to review the value for money of a range of externally contracted services and consider alternative options. And 3, review the model for revenue and finance performance measurement, taking into account the level of fixed charges and also attract sponsorship and central government philanthropic funder investment. 4 was around preparing overarching strategies to inform priority setting. In the face of these significant increases in service program demand and the increasingly diverse population and the changing expectations, we need an increased emphasis on operational strategy development to provide an organisation-wide roadmap to inform place-based planning, an operational model evolution, action, direction, budget and priority setting, targeting and sequencing. And finally, we need to meet our obligations in relation to the treaty. In the face of the Treaty of Waitangi and associated legislative requirements of Council, the challenge is to govern, lead, plan and deliver operationally in a manner that recognises and respects the significance of Te Tiriti. The operational planning and delivery involves designing and building refurbishing spaces and facilities that tell stories that reflect the past as well as strengthen the cultural identity. And it's also about service and program delivery that considers culture and diversity and is about continuous learning and improving.
Thanks, Kelvin. I guess a lot of my group's activity is driven by legislation. So it's the building area and the resource consent area. So not a huge amount of changes there. What we do want to achieve, though, is to have a better, I guess, interface with our customers. So we're looking at some ways we can connect better, communicate better with our customers through IT services. Building, I think there's opportunities we're currently exploring in terms of collaboration across the region. There's a lot of councils that have this very similar function and are applying the same building code. So it seems to make sense that there's some opportunities to do things a bit better together. I guess the biggest area, priority in my areas is Bob's strategy and policy area. We've been very successful as a council in the past by planning carefully in terms of what our township's going to look like, what the population is going to be, what sort of infrastructure we need to meet that, and then how we're going to pay for it. So that's been a successful model we've run. However, over the last decade, we haven't really refreshed a lot of that planning, and I guess it's really time to do so. But I think we've reached a period in our sort of evolution as a district where we have been very good at providing a particular product, and that's been greenfield development for families. I think now we need to start thinking about a paradigm shift in how we view how our district is going to grow and our township is going to grow. We face so really the priority is how do we plan for growth in the face of ongoing climate change issues, transport issues, reduction in emissions, providing for public transport, creating livable urban spaces with diverse and affordable housing, whilst also protecting and enhancing the natural environment. So there's a lot of balancing. So in terms of priorities in Bob's area, in my area, I guess the overall direction of the council from a strategic point of view, so future Selwyn, what is our district going to look like in 30, 40 years? And a lot of the work that's dropped out of here will inform the direction of that. We've got a significant work program identified for spatial planning for all of our areas. And I guess we want to drive intensification. We want to have different options, a range of typology of housing. So I think we can influence that through our planning. And again, one of the biggest things you've heard up here is public transport. While my area doesn't actually provide the public transport and it's an ECAN thing, we do need to be an influence in that area. and to provide the, I guess, how our urban form is going to drive our connectivity to Christchurch and in between our towns. So spatial planning is really big. This morning we heard from the need to protect our natural environment, the biodiversity strategy, and yes, Grant, I do understand that there are other players in this area, but we do have legislative responsibilities that we need to meet. So I think that's something we need to bear in mind. I guess the other thing that I'm just working on is having a more efficient strategic, I guess, alignment right across council. We have a plethora of different strategies and plans all going in sometimes the same direction, sometimes not. So one of the things that I've been tasked to do is to have a look at that and see if we can get greater alignment. Yeah, so that's the main things. I guess Te Riri obligations and how we can engage with mana whenua in the past has been challenging. And so we'd like to develop stronger relationships and better understand how we can understand priorities in that area and build them into our own work program. That's very important. Yeah, I guess that's the main things I had sketched out for developing growth. Thanks, Kel. Thanks, guys.
Awesome, thank you. Supposed to quote a previous speaker, I'm here to talk about roads, rubbish and sewage. So a number of sort of broad topics. The first one is legislative uncertainties and compliance pressures. As Calvin mentioned, we have a new government that's currently being formed, and it's very clear that there will be changes in legislation following that. In terms of Three Waters, the Local Government Act was amended by the Water Services Entities Act, and we are not. Thank you, sorry. Yeah, we're not to include Three Waters in any long-term planning. As you expect as staff, we could perceive that it could be a potential change, and so we have actually done Three Waters planning. But just to let you know, we're in a bit of a gap, if you like, until that legislation has changed. It's also fair to say there's a large increase in external regulation. We've got Tamata Arawai, who started. We've got Environment Canterbury, Wako Tahi. Is talking about economic regulation in our spaces, and so there's a higher requirement for monitoring, reporting, all that sort of compliance work. And so we are and will continue to work on systems improvements, as Calvin mentioned again, in terms of IT space. How can we do that more efficiently and effectively, setting up processes? Second thing is an escalating costs and renewals and maintenance programs across our assets. Using transportation as an example, our MOR budgets, which is maintenance, operations and renewals, is under pressure. We've had bitumen costs increase, emergency works, which are sort of diverting out some of our funding to cover those costs. AC, which is asphalt concrete, that's coming towards its renewal life. And so there's some pressures in there in terms of our operation and maintenance and transportation. We also have an aging building stock, which brings with its renewal upgrade program, and also some of our higher value modern buildings, which brings management costs along with them. The next one is water quality. This is a controversial one. It's got water quality, fluoridation, chlorination, and emerging contaminants. So just to mention a few. So fluoridation, a number of councils have been instructed by the Director General of Health to implement fluoridation of their water supplies. Selwyn has not been at this stage requested to do that, but we anticipate over the next 5 years that will be a requirement of council, or a requirement that's been put on council. So we're looking at budgeting for that. Chlorination, we have installed chlorination. I know there's still some public I suppose, desire for chlorination to remove. There's cost implications with that, and staff's recommendation is to continue to chlorinate, but that's the discussion point that we can see coming through. In terms of emerging contaminants, we've talked about nitrate before, and moving towards nitrate treatment or lower nitrate sources of water is something that we should be considering. That's a large cost and will likely be outside of the 10-year period. Last but not least, we have response to climate change and our growth needs. So we had our presentation from Aqualink, the climatic cycles and trends report through the last council meeting, and that identified that extreme rainfall events has been the greatest climatic risk to council's infrastructure. So we have projects identified for our townships, but outside of those township rating areas, there's still a gap. which we have been pursuing with Environment Canterbury for funding for that. In terms of growth projects, growth is a major focus. It has been for the last 10 years, and I think will continue to be so. Upgrading of the Pines wastewater treatment plant to meet those growth needs, installing water supply infrastructure, etc., continues to be one of our focuses. And just note here in terms of that environmental impact, Pines is our largest single point source of greenhouse gases being emitted. And we have plans to try and reduce those levels through our upgrade program as Pines 120. So those are my main points. Thanks.
Thanks, Murray.
Just take some comments on that. Any feedback, any thoughts on what we're seeing? It was a bit more of a bland and somber view than what the community had said and yourselves. So views on that. Are we out of whack, in the right space?
Sam, or Elizabeth?
My new name might be Sammy. Samantha, I mean. Yeah, question for you, Murray. You just said that Pines is your biggest emitter, and you're looking at that at the moment. What's in the pipeline for the biggest emitter?
Gee, I love the pipeline pun. That's awesome. So there's a number of upgrades moving from an aerobic treatment system to an anaerobic treatment system. We're catching those gases and using those to power generators to form electricity. So that sort of circular economy type approach. We're looking at using in the future our biosolids, which we dry through our solid drying halls, to then also run furnaces, which can then heat the greenhouses up even further and make that process more efficient. So there's a number of wastewater treatment process type improvements that we can look at doing.
Thank you. Sam?
Yeah, I mean, the realism of the challenge, I suppose it was nice to hear. I was wondering if the group did the same survey that elected members in the community did, and how comparative our thinking is on things, because we've said we've got 3 circles and we want to understand where the 3 circles intersect. Has there been any work to say, ask the similar sort of questions and find out what sort of things land in the middle as an emphasis where there's convergence of views, or has that not happened?
Well, people may have completed the surveys of their residents. Pulling that data out would be, given it's all anonymous, would be challenging. Unless we went and did it ourselves afterwards. I think the value of this conversation is more on the reality of what needs to occur from what we're doing. So what we need in a resilience to our infrastructure, what we need from community to deliver to community. It's putting that real life expertise on it to say, well, yeah, the aspiration's there, we follow the aspiration, but there are some things today that just have to be done. We can't ignore maintenance on roads forever because they'll decline in useful life quicker. So it is that different lens that we're applying to this piece. We'll get to that piece, one more slide, and then we're into having a look at how we line up.
Cool, and that provides, I think there's a good reminder for us that we do have this, what is community telling us and how to be representative, but we're actually also governors of an organisation that's responsible for $2.5 billion worth of assets that needs to ensure that we're responsible in our role here for the continuation of Selwyn District Council, and that needs to balance sometimes the representation view that we often want to bring and make that the forefront of the conversation. So good to have the reminder of the governance role.
Thank you, Sam. Deborah?
Oh, thank you. Can we go back to the question on DCs? I understand that previous council decisions did not have an appetite to charge DCs on community facilities, libraries, and we're talking capital projects here. And this has left us in a deficit with the ratepayer picking up those externality costs. So question 1 is, how do we correct this deficit? The second issue is probably with infrastructure and property, but it's still around DCs. It's how do we fund renewals? For example, we currently have bridges, land drainage culverts under roads, etc., that will need renewing. They're 50 years, they're out of their life at the moment. But what we have not done is we've been very good at charging DCs on site. Stormwater retention basins, holding back water for underground culverts for urban. But when we come down to smaller, the combination of a whole lot of, dare I say, 4 hectare lots, with regards to these upgrades, how are we funding those? Because you can't expect a pipe that was put in probably 70, 80 years ago to actually accommodate all the hard surfacing that has accumulated to meet the demand of actually managing a basic system like land drainage. The whole thing to me needs a total review, refresh, and what we can actually do. But it comes down to, we're a council, what is our appetite to actually undertake a DC review? And it's something that I will put up that I have struggled with. So hopefully we now have a council that has an appetite to review our DCs and actually put a fair system in that looks at the ratepayer portion of growth.
Thank you, Deborah. Give an answer, Kelvin.
Yeah, a lot in that, and the DC policy is being reviewed. So DCs can be collected for community infrastructure, which I believe we are collecting DCs for the likes of the Leaston, who not? Whataroa? Nods, no. I need to, the policy is, I just can't get it up quick enough to have a look, but we can tweak and look at that. Where a pipe would be replaced and renewed and expanded in its size, that expansion to deal with increased capacity around growth potentially can be captured, but noting that that renewal may happen significantly after the time in which a development goes in. So it's you can't specifically grab DCs for renewals because they are what they are, and you can't really sometimes see the population growth that far out, and we have limits. In terms of funding renewals, we have, and I'll jumping ahead to one slide, that is a risk that we do run. That decision was made here to not fund depreciation, but to fund renewal spend. That as renewals are starting to become more pricey, we are not necessarily increasing some of that, and we're using similar models. So we need to reflect probably a shift to depreciation funding over time. It wouldn't be a move in 1 year because it would become quite unaffordable. We'd need to think how we phase that in, but that's not a question for this LTP, but it's something that needs to be addressed in the very near future.
Thank you, Kelvin. Thank you, Deborah. Councillor Miller.
I'll just start with that last bit because you piqued my interest with depreciation, funding depreciation. Are councils that are fully funded depreciation in a significantly better position than us? I suppose it's something we might ask at a future meeting, just to see what that's like. But I really like what you're doing here with a list of must-dos, because inevitably we're going to have to get into slicing and dicing. But if we're concrete on our must-dos, the rest is a bit easier. But I suppose the challenge from the governance group that the must-dos are genuine must-dos, and we don't slot a few favourite little things on the side and as well while we're doing it, which is we're all keen to do. And I think while I've looking across at you, Barry, while I was last month, I suppose, what I have been really glad about being a Selwyn District Councillor is, and I've been on the wrong side of it, and I freely admit I was a proponent of no non-chlorination, but then you see things that happen like Queenstown, and you feel really proud to be part. Has done the water, and which has been from good advice from the staff. So just kudos, I guess, guys.
Hey, no further questions. Just flick to the next slide. Thanks, Jen. So with all of this, we are seeing some risks come through, and these risks predominantly are sitting in the financial sphere at the moment. And Grant quite well put it before that we are seeing pressures on costs. Costs are rising not only for the community, but they are rising for us as well. We have more obligations around what we need to deliver just to keep the machine running and delivering the services that we deliver. This will likely lead to pressure on what the rates number is. And while we're not at a position at this minute to say what that number will be, as previously communicated, it will be well beyond where we were last year, which was a 6% lift. We are looking more than likely in a double digit, so in the teens at this point in time. But that is where we need to make the hard decisions around, is it going to be at that level? Do we drop services? All of those questions need to come over the next few months. So it's really just a heads up that's a critical element going forward. The rating model that we've currently got has been in place for some time. The question is it fit for the future? Is it fit for a district which is growing in commercial and industrial and businesses, the change of rural to urban? How do we deal with what the community is made up of the future? We had probably fairly consistently lower priced houses. We're now seeing a growth in much more higher priced, higher valued properties. Our rating system currently is heavily geared towards targeted rates, and we know that the 30% cap is right at its limit in the 29% range, a little above that. And we have very little differentials within the rating model. And so we need to think about, again, not here and now for this RTP, but it's thinking about where do we need to head in the future and start to think about what that looks like. A full rating review is substantial and will take a lot of effort and a lot of consultation and will create a little bit of community angst. But these are the hard calls we've got to make, and we've got to be willing to go forward on them. The final piece here is around is what we've just discussed around renewals, and where we have been funding the actual renewal program. So what we do is we look out 30 plus years and say, this is what we think it's going to cost us to renew assets as and when they come forward, and that rolls forward, and we take an average of that and attempt to rate it. It can be very easy, I guess, around the table here when rates are under pressure to trim that back and potentially ignore it for a year or two and hopefully catch up, where depreciation is a much easier thing to measure and a lot easier to have transparency of. The challenges that we do have at the moment is the incredible uplift in valuations, which would put significant pressure on rates. Some councils are electing to partially fund depreciation. Some are removing funding of depreciation given the three waters, but I think it's a much more practical way of dealing with this in the future, but we'll do some work on what that might mean and how we would potentially phase that in. But they are some of the risks that are really emerging right at this minute. Right. We've talked enough. It's time for everyone to do a bit of work. Jen, have you got some handouts to?
Thank you, Jenny. Yep, that'd be great. I'm not too sure how long we've been ticking along here, but it looks like we've got might be beneficial to have a little bit of a 5-minute break.
Phil, were you wanting a question? No, he's gone.
Just seeking from around the table.
No
sorry,
question.
Phil.
No, I'm no question. I'm here. I'm just listening and taking it all in.
Oh no, I just saw a note come up that you were waving for attention.
Councillors happy to continue on? Would you like a bit of a break or?
Look, if we could push through, we've probably got 20 minutes that would be valuable to have. Otherwise, we are going to be pushing beyond.
Very good.
Beyond 5. So what's being handed around is the 3 lenses: intent, expertise, and the lived experience. So we've taken from that, and we've sorted those by the 4 well-beings, and we've pulled out the key messages that have come through from those lenses. And what we're looking for here now is alignment. And so we're looking for that sweet spot. Ultimately, we'll put this into a graphic around the circles. But for ease of looking at this at this time, we thought this would be the way to approach it. Just to note, between the intent and the expertise, there's a band that runs across, which isn't necessarily a well-being, but it's the underlying piece within the council of how do we achieve all of this in the best way. So the digital capability, fit for future, operating model, operational excellence, and future sell and strategy alignment. It's stuff that underpin everything we do and run across all 4 well-beings. Jen, I might hand this one back to you. Going to run this piece. I wasn't quite. I can run it.
You want me to just go through and summarize?
I think what we're looking for here is the intersect points, aren't we? So look, if we just run through each of the well-beings, and I can quickly summarize here, and we'll take, if anyone has any views that differ, raise your hand. But I saw 2, and on the other question here, which I'm not sure is at the top of the sheet on here, but it is what do we want to achieve for the district and the communities in the LTP? And the other one is, what is the council's role? Is it to advocate or implement? And as we go through these, we'll see some of these. But in the environmental piece, I think there's 2 clear pieces here, and one is around green space, natural environment, and climate change. I'll link those together. And then the next piece is around water quality. We heard from the community wanting the protection of water. We got Mana Whenua really wanting to make sure that we have Te Wahora protected and looked after, and we have some other specific projects around wastewater, which really important to the Runanga. So we want to. I think we've got 2 key aspects here where we completely overlap, and then we have some pieces around the lived experience, which we can deal with through policy. They're not particularly probably LTP matters in terms of projects, but they are in terms of our planning and how we go about future selling, and that being the balanced land development and lifestyle and sustainable farming. Contrary views or other things that need to be put into that intersection piece?
I think that's good. Good summary. I've already just seen this.
Yeah,
but what stands out is the water, and so that's Te Wahora, water quality is mentioned all through them, protection of water, and then green space, and whether that's native green spaces or reserve green spaces, that's kind of both connected in here too. So those 2 stand out for me with what you presented now.
I think the one key question here is some of this is where do we sit in this? Whether it's there'll be an element of partnership across this, but there's also, are we advocate with ECAN and how we include ECAN in these discussions to make sure that we're aligned in this? And so I think a key step as we move through this LTP process is to make sure that, and it's probably sitting on the environment and economic, there's 2 key elements here around water and transport that we need to make sure that we're pushing the right direction.
I think on there too, then it's thinking, I mean, how much do we care about this and how much influence do we have over the outcome that's been sought through it? And then that would help us figure out what are the things that we are most effective at putting our funds and time and energy into.
I'm just interested, water quality, it's a function of Environment Canterbury. Are we going to facilitate them doing something about it? I mean, and I'm all for the restoration of Tawaora. Catchment planning, is that our role or is that Environment Canterbury's role? Are we already paying rates to do that and them not doing it, or are we pressurising them to make sure they do it properly? There seems to be a few things here that are rolling into responsibilities, protection of water and lived experience. Yes, water is very important, and we're seeing massive degradation over the last 10 years in the checks in the mail as far as nitrates go. But I'm interested to see who's paying out of what pocket.
A really good point, and I think that's the key thing: is we need to create the conversations with Environment Canterbury through this planning process to say, look, we've gone out to the community, we've got views, and I have committed that we would share this stuff with others so that we can make sure that we're not duplicating and spending money wisely. But we do need to push as hard as we can for these things to be done. But I'm of the view, and I think you'd support this, that we shouldn't be stepping in because someone else hasn't done their job.
Megan.
Yes, so just looking at your environmental I do agree that if it's not the role of council and it's a role to therefore advocate, great, we should be advocating. But when there is a role that there might be land use activity that we do have a role in, that will actually improve the waterway, then we need to investigate that as an option.
Yeah.
The wastewater infrastructure for Fisherman's Point, we're coming back. We've got an opportunity to meet directly with Taumitu again. And certainly what I'm hearing from that community is now that we've got some good climate change experts in place, that might not be the priority, but let's talk tomorrow and determine if it really is. So, but climate change adaptation seems to be really important.
That group has been really, really useful in the meetings that have occurred. It's been great conversation. Any further on that? We'll move across to economic. I think the one key, while it's not strictly economic in its own sense, but I think the key number one priority coming out here and is really that roading improvements, ensuring that we've got an infrastructure that's safe and reliable to be used. And we do, as Murray said, have some significant just maintenance pressures on us. So we need to maintain that network. There's a series of things in here where it's around about how we influence ECAN again around public transport, some planning aspects around urban spread, and that'll come into spatial planning that will come through Future Salon, but so we'll have funding in there for that. But in terms of projects, real attention needs to go to that transport piece, and I think then it's how do we enable the economic development strategy, which we're working up currently, to ensure that we're influencing the right people to get the economy growing in Selwyn.
Sophie.
Yeah, there's a couple of things around livable urban areas, like building up rather than out, but also local job opportunities. And there is research around, if you've got medium density sort of urban neighborhoods, you do tend to get, yes, it's smaller businesses rather than, big businesses that bring a lot to the district, but it is a lot more that local business, which came through in other parts of what we've heard today. So they kind of all tie together, but in a bit more of it's more of a macro neighborhood level rather than micro neighborhood level rather than macro development.
Yeah, fully agree with that. And I think if you look at the two in the intent window around economic development and innovation and that enabling development of local job opportunities, that's a prime example. And a real life example is in the city with Te Pai. Opposite Te Pai is there's a building there. The ground floor was empty tenants for probably 3 years while Te Pai was being built. I noticed the other day driving past, they are now fully tenanted. So it requires that urban growth to then create and we're seeing that currently in the town centre.
Sophie, thank you, Sam.
Yeah, I was
Actually, that density of
sorry.
people also adds to the public transport viability.
Yes.
But they are actually totally linked together.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to support the public transport comment that's there. It's listed in all three of them. It's an area that all three areas are very concerned about. It's not necessarily going to be us that delivers it. And so that's then thinking about how much do we care, and then how much of an influence do we have? Is it advocacy? Is it provision, or what is it in between? But I think that we need to highlight that as what we've heard from our community through all three spheres, and then figure out what our action is after that.
And there's some real connections if you move to the across the next access to healthcare. Creating a public transport for healthcare or for social services or whatever it may be could be a way of influencing the need for some of this without requiring ECAN to be involved. So thinking about innovative ways of how we deal with the issues in front of us.
Right.
Just in the public transport space of it, everyone loves public transport, but the trouble is people in Selwyn don't get on it. It's like, using my own hometown as an example, people in Taitapu, they want a bus service desperately, and you say, well, how often would you use it? Well, not for me, but I know that guy next door might use it. And that's a culture we've got here, isn't it? We all want it, but no one pays to get on it.
I think that's a bit of a generalisation, because for the likes of Rolleston, it is needed, like the direct services here. But like Sophie said, I need to get the population growth, and the likes of the smaller rural towns, it'll be difficult to justify that.
It's really good points. We had ECAN in here not long ago talking about public transport, and they had stats around usage, and we had routes that were not well subscribed to and were pulled out. So I think you're right, Nicole, that focus on the larger population areas and moving the mass amount around the places where we should be focusing on and encouraging that.
Malcolm.
I'd have to agree. I think ECAN isn't willing to do it for us. Do we have a look at doing something localised for ourselves? And on the other side of that is we know that sooner or later we need a corridor to the city. Do we in our planning establish that corridor ahead of time as we go in a gradual process, so it is there for us as we grow?
Thank you, Malcolm. Sam?
Well, just to support what Malcolm's just said, Sharon and I have organised a follow-up from the transport guys that came and presented to the council, where we kind of got the arms folded back from the Environment Canada and what they were going to do. So Sharon and I are just pressing in again, saying we don't really accept that. We're going to meet with Peter and Stephanie and try and explore other ways of trying to get an outcome for Selwyn. And at the GCP meeting last week, the public transport guys that were there talked about how Rolleston service was like the most utilised service, and people were more often not being able to get on full buses than being able to find a space on a bus, and for the express service, particularly in the morning. So it depends on the towns, I guess, that we're in and the time of day that people are travelling, and our own perceptions of what public transport can look like too. And we've often talked here in the room about the Leaston Darfield connection through Rolleston to link our smaller towns, which isn't going to be a service that's going to run every 7 minutes. But the link for PT Futures from Rolleston into town is looking at that far more frequent, reliable level of service where people can stop thinking about having to get in their car because they know they're going to have to wait 3 or 4 minutes till the next service to get on.
Thanks, Sam. Sharon?
Just being out and about and connecting in with key stakeholders, what's coming through very strongly, particularly from the developers, is that public transport is one of the key challenges and barriers. And that's coming through quite strongly for them in terms of builds, and that's what they're hearing from people who are looking to purchase houses as well, is the need for public transport, and not necessarily into Christchurch, but actually public transport within the Rolleston district and that movement around within the Selwyn district and that movement around the district as well. So.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, I think public transport's appropriate in the most densely populated areas, and as you've pointed out, Sam, the Southbridge, Leaston, and as Grant's pointed out as well, expectation usage is quite low, and we had the discussion with the guys from ECAN about that, and I think understanding the usage of it and what the people are catching the buses, where they're going to, and I think there's an intersect there with public transport and potentially healthcare, especially in that mental space. And if there's not opportunity to intersect and provide public transport in some of those more rural areas, then it's about the services that they're seeking to access, and potentially it is that intersect in the next pillar there around access to health.
Kelvin, you might better recall from the stats when ECAN came through, the Rolleston line going into town. Is that a high proportion of students that are utilising the trips?
From the top of my head, certainly as it was, and they put on additional services at some point to deal with that. It's still not a huge. I drive that motorway every day, and I can't actually think about the last couple of days. I can't remember seeing a city bus going along it. So yeah, it's not frequent, and it is a long journey still.
I think Nicole. Sorry.
There's the direct services. There's 3 in the morning and the 3 in the afternoon, and those are the ones that we're talking about. Those are the ones that are oversubscribed. They're people, and this is where I've harped on before and said it at GCP. There are people getting left behind. So if they've got out of their cars, tried to get on a bus, they can't get on the bus, then how long is it for them to try again to get on the bus?
Okay, moving on to social, and there's a number of things here which are influences that we can have in thinking about, and we've got good conversations and relationships currently with Te Whatu Ora, and a new government will have a new lens on some of this, but we are making good inroads and sort of talking about what the future needs to be, and I think that's the key element for us within this space as building those relationships and thinking about the planning for whether it be secondary hospitals, satellite, medical, 24-hour facilities. It's where we need to be in the discussion. What we can, though, deal with in the LTP, and I think it's that response to the changing needs while balancing what our responsibility is with the responsibility of others. But what came out from the lived experience was a lot around some planning around how we build and where we build. And we've probably in the past been we'll build here, we'll build there type thing, and it hasn't quite been planned. So it's thinking about how do we create the hubs, how do we create the satellites in what we need. So we talked last week at council around needs assessments, and a focus should be moving to a more consolidated needs based on sport, rec, facilities, culture in one view, as opposed to a number of hits on it. So I think we should be including within this LTP some funding around making sure that we have a really robust needs assessment. So we are knocking off key things at the right time to the right needs. And I know there's a few projects that are popping up that we'll discuss in future meetings, but that seems to be a key piece there. And then a sense of community. So we saw in the stats a reduction in people's feeling of connectedness. Now, that I don't think is being driven by council in any way, shape or form, but it may be just the changing face of the community. We've got a lot more internal migration from within New Zealand who are coming from larger cities where that sense of connection may not be as strong. And therefore arriving, but how do we foster and enable, which sort of spans into our next area on culture and enabling cultures to bring their culture into the community and feel valued and feel listened to, rather than us drive the culture, we're enabling the culture. So yeah, back in the social, it's around that delivery of service and being planningful around where we put infrastructure. Any comments? I'm losing you all.
Told you. Te tiriti. Sam?
Oh, I mean, I think healthcare is a little bit like public transport, and we mentioned before, and maybe the traditional model, the traditional model isn't serving our community very well. So we need to think about what are the new ways that might look. We've already expanded into owning medical centres and building those. We've built the health hub across the road, and we've struggled now for about 3 or 4 years to be able to fill the health hub with our desired outcome. And maybe there's a conversation for us to think about being more actively involved in some of the provision of services. That's clearly what everyone's asking for. And it might be that we just continue to advocate and want someone else to do it. But I think with a really clear message from our community, we need to consider what our role actually is in that space. And it might be more than it has been before. And it felt like building the Darfield Medical Centre, there's some steps like, oh, that's something new. And then you talk to other councils and no one else is doing building a health hub, except for Waitaki, who owns a full hospital and runs that themselves. So there's others doing some stuff, and where do we want to go to next, and how might we lead some of the local government conversation about what does provision of services to communities look like? Again, it's not the stuff that 10 years ago, Grant, we were hearing that this is the 3 things council should be doing, but now I think we're really clearly hearing that is a big need for our community.
Kia ora, Sam. Thank you, Bob.
I agree with Sam. I think it's one of the big things in our area. We've got about 8,500 people on the books. There's a waiting list of over 200 people. And I heard of some people look at a section the other week, and the solicitor advised them not to buy it because they couldn't get health care. So it is becoming a problem in the small in the out in the areas.
Thank you, Bob. Sophie?
Yeah, I totally sympathise with those comments, but at the same time, coming back to something that was mentioned earlier, is if we're going to build it, we've got to be able to run it well as well. And that's the biggest issue we've had with the health hub, is that a good half, maybe 2/3 of it, has been filled by people who are doing it well. But the one thing that everybody initially asked for, the GP, we have no way of making that happen. And that's not even at a regional council level. That's not something that even the government is managing to do well. So I guess my fear is, yes, I would love to see more health hubs popping up, but if you can't actually provide the service that they're intended, they're literally just going to be vacant space. So I don't know quite what the best option is there, and perhaps we just need to narrow it down to what can we do well and what do we advocate for differently.
Good point, Sophie. Thank you. Elizabeth?
Sometimes I feel like we have days where we're just looking at all the holes in the cheese and not actually the cheese. And I just want to say, I actually want to celebrate some stuff that I feel personally, prior to getting into council, that we freaking do awesome. I think there's no complaints in the cultural side. I have never lived in a region with so much multicultural opportunities for the community to get engaged in. We put a lot on. I think Denise's team and all the others that are involved in facilitating that do an incredible stuff. There's so much stuff going on, I can't find enough weekends to get out. So yeah, I think we should celebrate that, and I think we do a really, really good job, and it's across the ages, it's across the stages. There's a lot of different opportunities. We have a very vast array of interests in our district, and that's one of the things that made me want to stay and live in the South Island. Where I come from, it's everybody's a bit of a cardboard cutout of each other, but I come here and there's so much diversity in people's interests. And there's so much opportunity to explore that. So I think, to me, that's just tick, tick, tick. We're already there.
Oh, well done. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. It's good to hear some positive feedback. I guess from me, we have this real tendency to cut things into boxes and put things into squares. And we're talking about hubs and health and cultural and social. It really says to me that it's about building hubs that cater for a number of needs and services and we've got a health hub here and we've got a sports centre over there, where we're trying to encapsulate a lot of the 4 pillars that actually go round and round. So for me and the cultural intersect there, it's about, I guess, honouring Te Tiriti, understanding our multiculturalism, and providing spaces and places that that have all of these things connected to our rural areas, and finding the right co-investment strategy to support that. And at the end of the day, I think we'll be aligned with just about everything in the country. Where you go? If you find that, it would be great. Oh, sorry, Sharon.
Sorry. I was just going to say, it's a fine line, isn't it, that what council is and is not responsible for, and we cannot be the be all and end all to everything, because otherwise we'd be going to triple digits. It's about finding that balance, but just for councillors understanding, the executive team and myself, we're talking at a higher level about our thinking and our strategies, which is more around that place-based, much more holistic needs analysis, so that perhaps not for this LTP, but for outgoing LTPs, what we're bringing forward is a needs analysis of, say, for example, the Rolleston community needs analysis for the Springs, so that when we're asking or taking into account the community's feedback, we're also looking at those individual areas, so that we know that money is tight, and we know that we perhaps have limited funds to make investments, so that in the longer term we can give councillors the best information from a holistic view and from an absolute needs analysis, which encompasses all the 4 well-beings, because they are interlinked and interwoven, and they're very hard to separate.
Kia ora, Sharon. Anybody else?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Phil. Deborah. Oh, Deborah.
That's right. Deborah's before me.
Thanks, Deborah.
Thanks, Phil. Look, what I'm starting to hear is, with regards to our environmental, economic and social and cultural, is while it's the 4 pillars for local government, it's also the 4 pillars for central government. And I just can't but help feel that central government are trying to actually, with limited resources and funding to local government, pass a lot of these costs on to us to fill their gaps that they can't fulfill. So I would actually advocate for local government to actually be able to sit down with this new government and actually say, this is what our community want. This is what we can fulfill on the budget that we are allocated through the rate take. Where do we connect with you to fill in the gaps? And I think that's so important. And that actually turned up with transport and environmental issues with just local government, within local government, with environment regional councils. So I think there's a whole disconnect with the way that the structure has actually relied on something that was set up probably, 80, 90 years ago. The whole structure for today's lifestyle and where we're going needs to be revamped, and that's my comment.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Phil?
Yeah, I guess, thanks, Deborah. That was awesome. I guess, look, I'm looking at all of the spaces there, environmental, economic, social and cultural, and I'm listening to what you were saying, Sharon, about money and everything. And of course, the big thing about us in terms of people is that we've had a growing population. With the growing population has become the growing number of people who want to contribute into the community, but not only as users of the community, but also as leaders within the community. Things like, we know there are so many community groups, and I talk about primarily in Rolleston because that's obviously where we've been growing the most. There's so many community groups that have grown. So we should be looking to try and facilitate these groups. And if our long service, if our long-term plan has an ability to help facilitate these things, get away from the whole OPEX debate, move into the, we're going to build or not build, but we're going to help other people do things that are going to be doing those things in that social and economic and cultural sector, then maybe that's where we should be leaning into. I guess that's kind of everything else people are saying. It's been fantastic stuff. It's been really great listening to it. Particularly, I enjoyed listening to the stuff, Elizabeth, that you were talking about so much stuff to do. It's because people are here. Thank you. I'll stop talking now.
Thank you very much, Phil. Kelvin, what else do you need from councillors?
So I think actually summed up the cultural piece quite nicely, but it is around how we enable that to occur, and Elizabeth also with comments around what Denise's team are providing. But yeah, how we honour Te Treaty and build the relationships that we've currently got. So they're only just commencing. We've just signed the partnership agreement. It's in its infancy. It's just starting. So I think that's the key focus in those areas that we need to have right here and now. Jen, what was to follow this? I think we're now at diminishing returns stage. But look, thank you for the contribution. It has been incredibly worthwhile. We've taken a lot out of that we'll be able to bring forward to the next workshop, which is in a couple of weeks' times. And just quickly, Jen, what are we covering off again? Remind me.
At the next workshop, it will be coming to you with around how we're proposing to consult with the community as we go into LTP consultation, and also a playback of what we've talked about today, so you can see how that's. So that will include the community outcomes, and so with the NSEC now, Ben and team will have a review of where we are with that, just to make sure that we haven't missed something. But I think looking at it, we're reasonably well covered, and we'll discuss that a little bit more. And then quickly following that workshop, we're into the budgets and projects where we will have the challenges. As I said earlier, there is pressure on the rate number.
Sam?
Yeah, my question is around the use of this information from today and the public nature of it. And I mean, I get that it's not like we were making decisions about things, and there's a danger in having a media release that says these were the things discussed today and everyone thinks there have been decisions on the way that we're going. But if all we're relying on is people wanting to rewatch the video or having watched today, then actually there's some valuable stuff here that informs future decision making that I think would be good to share with the community. So it's probably a question around workshops in general, Sharon, and how we're going to share this. I mean, the Ombudsman said yesterday, it's all very well saying your workshop's open, but if you don't publicise the fact that it's open, it's not very open. So how do we talk to our community beyond today about this content?
Thank you, Sam.
I think there's a couple of things. One, the pack that we've been through today we'll put up online and make sure that's available. There's a spot for LTP on the website, which we'll put it there, plus other spaces. But I'm looking over to Sarah and marketing comms on this, but the sheet that we've got out in front of you, we will look to deal with that and tidy it up, make it a little bit more meaningful, and have that as a one pager where people can see that at a glance. This is what the community said. It might be more than one page, but this is what the feedback was from the community. Thank you for your contribution. This was what was being said. And look, if there's differing views from that, people will raise them through different forum and that type of thing. And I think that's useful conversation.
Sharon.
I just briefly wanted to thank Kelvin and Jenny and Sarah, because you've brought a whole different way of LTP in terms of pre-engagement and information forward for councillors and ELT and the team in general to consider. And I just wanted to congratulate you and thank you, because I know the level of hard work and effort that you're putting into this, and just wanted to acknowledge your work today.
Kia ora, Sharon. Great work, team. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Oh, sorry, Bob.
Yeah. Just one thing, Kelvin, when this goes out for consultation, would it be a point in putting it somewhere that this is a partnership with other organisations as well? Just so that at the end of it, people won't say, this is what we thought you were doing. So I think it might be important.
Yeah, no, we'll think that through and yeah, definitely include that. I suppose what we're doing is really just putting it out for information, and should we receive comment back, then we'll be taking that on board. We're advertising currently for people to register and to have your say for LTP discussions. So what we're trying to do is create a community of people who want to be the testers of concept and ideas, and so we can continually get feedback on items rather than the Facebook warriors.
Thanks, Kelvin. I've just got Councillor Miller and then Councillor Hassan.
Okay.
Oh, look, I just I think the challenge is always, and Bob talked about it earlier, about some of his ratepayers, is somewhere along the way we have to provide our ratepayers with perception that they're getting value for their dollar.
Yeah.
If I open my rates bill and it's $5,000, somehow or other I've got to feel that I'm getting $5,000 worth of value out of STC, and whether it's through understanding that, in my case, they're providing cemeteries and things that I didn't know they were doing, but they're doing a great job, you know, and so just all those things you don't think about that the council's providing that comes in your $5,000 that you sort of go, oh, okay. So I guess that's the marketing team's, for want of a better word, is to distill that down into a one pager that goes with your rates bill and says, well, actually, this is what you're getting for your money.
Yeah.
Great point. Councillor Hassan.
Thank you. Look, I've just answered on chat with regards to Phil Dean's comment. And my question is about, I guess, the compliance issues. And I'll just choose health and safety as a barrier, limiting community participation on being volunteers in community spaces. We used to be able to use the community to actually provide and pay it forward with regards to actually participating in our community. With regards to compliance issues, where do we draw the line of having to say, no, this is a council facility, we cannot ask you to participate or actually do any volunteering work because you're not a council registered organisation. So therefore everything goes to a council CCO. And you actually, if you want to look at the costs that are actually being on charge for that council CCO, the ratepayers will just in awe drop. I could give you an example. I'll leave it at there, but we really, really have to consider, are we actually servicing our ratepayers really well in meeting all the compliance issues, being volunteers in our community, in our public spaces?
Appreciate the comments, Deborah. Thank you very much for the reminder.